Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Cold Feet Podcast. I am privileged to have the one and only Petra from Petra Fisher Movement. So, Petra, can you please go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, Sean. I guess I'm a movement coach. I've been working in this area for about 9 years now, and my focus is helping people build more sustainability into their bodies in ways that are really practical and focused on your real life. So that's what I do.
I like that you're able to sum up your life purpose in one sentence. Many people still struggle with that intro part. So today's podcast is just really going to be diving into feet, foot health, how to transition to minimal footwear. Petra here, I'll let her say all her juicy stuff that she's launching, but she is one of the world renowned, I think I pronounced that right, female health experts when it comes to feet. She's has a huge international audience community. We're both in a similar world, just in different parts of the planet Earth. So that's going to be today. So Petra, take it away. The mic's on you. I'm going to work on my listening skills. And could you just dive into feet, footwear, transitioning? Tell us about your article you launched, and I'm all ears, and we're all ears.
Okay. So I guess the thing we were talking about right before we started was just that feet for me have been an entry point into movement. I think that feet are just an opportunity for everybody to consider because they're an easy win. And I'm a huge believer in easy wins. We have really weak, stiff feet as a general population. And when you work on your feet, you work on your whole entire body because they connect to the ground. So you're working on the low hanging fruit when you work on your feet with the biggest rewards. And I'm 100% about efficiency and trying to get the most out of your work. So I think that if anybody wants to improve their health, then it's a no-brainer to work on your feet. And we've got so many great tools about that these days. What's interesting though, as you know for sure about working on feet, is that it's a cultural shift when you're talking about feet. And people don't understand that what we've been told our whole lives about needing supportive footwear, or just seen our whole lives about what shoes are supposed to look like, is actually really not helping your feet, not helping your health, and is many times straight up wrong. So there's a lot of resistance to changing footwear. And so that's where I think we have a big role to play in terms of education and in terms of helping people understand not just the benefits of changing your footwear, which I think you've talked about a ton and I talk about a ton, but actually how to do it. And I think that's where the question marks are for most people, is like they start out with a wardrobe of, your 100 shoes you've collected your whole life and that you love, like you legit love the shoes you've been buying. And then you're like, but my feet hurt. I have pelvic floor problems. I want to start doing something about that. Holy crap, what do I even start with? Like, what do I do? And so I know that's something I'm excited to be working on, and I know you're super excited about as well.
Well, Petra, can I ask you, how did you get into this world of barefoot, and did you go on your own personal transition journey as well?
Yeah, for sure. I had spectacularly bad feet. I still have challenging feet because of all the terrible things I did to myself. So I was a lawyer, and I'm very short. I'm only about 5'1". And so I thought it would be a great idea to wear sky high heels when I was lawyering. So I had full on 4-inch platform heels that I wore consistently daily to work. And when you're working as a lawyer, you're not working for 8 hours a day. You're working for 14 hours a day a lot of the time. So I had terrible, terrible shoes. Before that, I was dating a surfer. That was before I really surfed, but I thought I was going to. So I wore flip-flops a lot as well. Also a terrible foot choice. So I had super weak feet. And because I was a lawyer and I wanted to be fit and I wanted some stress release, I also started running. So I was pounding my feet in motion control running shoes all the time. And I gave myself all kinds of body problems. So no surprise there. Now that I know more about actually what the problem was. So I really had to do a major transition. And I think, like many people, my introduction to the world of healthier feet was when I came across the work of Katie Bowman, who has introduced a lot of people to healthy feet with her teaching and especially her books. And as soon as I read about it, I was like, oh my God, of course, this all syncs together. I have super weak feet. They're unfunctional. They're unhealthy. And the truth is that most foot problems aren't a disease exactly. They're more a symptom of these weak, unhealthy feet. And so doing a general broad-based foot and body strengthening program is going to be fantastically helpful to deal with most foot problems. Even if you're like, I want the bunion solution, what you mostly need is the whole foot health solution. And that's certainly what's been really helpful for me. And I still have a pathway ahead of me for my feet, but it's just been a game changer for me for sure.
Yeah, foot health and strengthening is always going to give you a very, very big bang for your buck because it's always going to lead, even as you said, if you're just trying to fix your bunion, it's going to lead to reduced knee pain, it's going to lead to better hip alignment, and it's just going to make you a better athlete. And I think that everyone who went on some sort of barefoot transition journey became a healthier, more holistic, more connected person because of their foot journey, not just because they're trying to realign their big toe.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that, you start thinking about your body in a slightly different way when you start exploring it with the goal of nurturing functional wellness. And I know functionality has been a term that's been thrown around a lot, especially in your world of more athletic stuff. And it's not always very helpful because I'm not sure what function really means when it's applied in athletics. But, when function means allowing your body to do the things your body is supposed to do and to have access to a wide variety of patterns, then you suddenly start exploring your body in very, very different ways. And very helpful ways, because that's what bodies like. Bodies like variety, and bodies like to be able to do what they're designed to do, which is to move. So, I think that's the other thing when you think about feet, what people don't get is that, when you go for a walk in traditional shoes, you are moving your feet across the world. You go for 5 miles, you've moved your feet 5 miles worth of time. But what you haven't necessarily moved is within the foot. If the foot isn't supinating and pronating as you walk, you're missing out on a lot of intrinsic to your body movement, even though extrinsic to you, you are moving. And that's where the subtlety comes in. And that's where I think a lot of people can go even one step further in their journey, because simply strengthening your feet and simply being barefoot doesn't necessarily get you to that full functional outcome of your foot really doing its thing properly. So that's kind of where I'm at these days with thinking about feet.
And Katie Bowman also discusses the concept a lot of texture and how not only is it about like the ability of your foot to do all the motions that the ankle and the toes can do, but also your feet are your sensory devices. So by exposing your feet to the ground, you're feeling the ground beneath you. Your skin itself is also living tissue that needs to adapt to the terrain around it. We feel it all the time when we walk outside in our garden and the floor is too hot. That's because our skin is telling us, "Hey, bud," or "buddy," whatever your skin calls you. It's a little bit too hot right now. Be careful where you walk. You said before when you were a lawyer, so you were wearing heels for quite a while, and then when you were running, you're wearing motion control, conventional sneakers, we'll call them. Let's dive a little bit down that for those who are not familiar with the negative benefits of high-heeled shoes and or it's a kind of like a different topic, sneakers.
The negative benefits, that's a whole new concept to me.
The negative aspect. I've been in Israel too long. I'm forgetting my English. Just kidding. The negative
No,
aspect of heels. Yeah.
Okay, so let's broadly talk about conventional shoes, because I think that most people have at least heard that really high heels are bad for you, even if they don't know
Correct.
exactly why. So I think you can really think about everything shoe on a continuum, and it's a continuum of features that are more foot damaging towards more foot supporting, you could say. And I don't mean that in the sense of support physically, but to allow your foot to do what it wants to do or what it's supposed to do. So I think of usually as 5 main features in a shoe that you could think about. There's how raised the heel is. So if you imagine a heel raise as like you were standing facing downhill on a hill, you could be on flat ground or you could be on a really steep hill, and your body's going to react differently to whatever height is underneath the heel, but it's always going to affect your entire body. So even if you have a conventional sneaker, I mean, that has still a raised heel that's going to have similar effects to your body as my 4-inch stilettos. It's just not as pronounced. So you've got to get rid of the heel in order to let your body work as it should work, which is to respond to the real world around it and not to always be in one heel rise. Both sneakers and high heels and most other conventional shoes have very narrow toe boxes. So their toe is narrow. And when your toes are artificially squished together all the time, they don't have the opportunity to widen, which means that you can't create an arch properly because your arch muscles are attached to your big toe. And you also create a lot of literal squish on your bones and tissues. And that literal squish is leading to your hammer toes and your bunions and your neuromas, because those tissues shouldn't be squished all the time. They need to have space to move. So you have real problems from the toe box. There's a lack of flexibility in conventional soles. Again, both high heels and sneakers are fairly solid and can't respond to any rolling through your foot that you would need to do to functionally propel yourself forward in space. So when you walk, you should absolutely have a big toe that bends back somewhere around 60 degrees. The opinions are not 100% clear on that. But if you're in a conventional shoe, you will get zero movement within that big toe extension, which will stiffen your big toe over time. Also, there's your bunions and there's your hammer toes from that kind of positioning in the shoe, because it also happens to be that they often raise the toes of shoes, but we can talk about that later. And there you lose the texture. So the texture in the ground is about sensory perception. You got a lot of brain input from your feet, as you know, but it's also about mobilization within the many joints of the foot. So if you're never exposing your feet to texture, you stiffen your feet. They don't know how to respond to the world around you. So you expose your feet to texture for sensory input and for mobilization input. So soles, heels, toe boxes. Toe lift is what I just touched upon earlier, toe spring. It's put into shoes like running shoes because their soles are so thick that if you didn't have toe spring, you would fall over. So they put a lifted toe to allow you to rocker over the toe when you walk. But what that does to your foot over time is, if you're in a lot of toe spring shoe, is it shortens the tissues on the top of your foot. It over lengthens the tissues on the bottom of your foot, which ends up giving you an imbalanced foot. So there you're looking at your plantar fasciitis, absolutely hammer toes. You're looking at metatarsal issues. So really big overloads on your forefoot. That's what I'm still dealing with. So that kind of really, it creates this foot that if you imagine a banana that was sitting on its rocker side, that's what your foot ends up kind of looking like. And that's not ideal. And then the final aspect of a shoe is how well it's attached to your foot. So I guess the one thing about high heels and running shoes is they're definitely attached to your foot, but my flip-flops weren't. And when you're wearing a shoe that's not attached, then you're gripping all of the time. And when you're gripping all of the time, you're using your muscles again in a really non-functional way, because those muscles should be free to respond to the world instead of having to grip. So my flip-flop years probably did a fair bit of damage because of a gripping pattern. So that's all the shoe stuff that you don't want to have. And the shoe stuff that you want to get to eventually is the shoe stuff that lets your foot do all the things a foot should do. But as we talked about, we want to talk about kind of practically, how do you get from point A, where you're wearing your stilettos, to point B, where you're barefoot or you're wearing a very minimal shoe, in a way that respects your body and doesn't cause you injuries along the way as you adapt. Is that fair to
Wow.
say?
Wow. First of all, you dive so into an explanation. You really thoroughly explained it. You also like backed it up with a little bit of the anatomy of the structure of the foot. You didn't just like throw out zero drop, flexible sole. I also the last one specifically about being firmly attached to the foot. That's a lot of time like kind of like brushed aside. I think that's the most important. I think that the main difference between sneakers and sandals, even minimalist sandals, is that some of them are still flopping around. You know, especially if the thong strap style ones, if they're not really holding your foot, and you're walking with your like, you know, barefoot style sandal and you're flopping around, that's not affecting gait in a positive way. And these things are super important to understand, that if you're already wearing minimalist footwear, you may as well do it right, because you're already taking the steps to do it right. I also really like, in the beginning when we were speaking about heels and sneakers, it kind of made me just picture perhaps a future post where we kind of look at max discomfort. Let's look at it like the banana. So like max discomfort, which is like a heel. Like everyone knows heels are bad for you. In fact, you go to the wedding, the second the ceremony's over, everyone's dancing barefoot because heels suck and they hurt your feet. And you can go to the most closed-minded podiatrist, doctor, movement professional who's like super about the Hoka cushion shoes, and there's many people professionals who I respect who have opinions like this, and they'll agree that heels are bad. Then we'll have on the other end of that spectrum the super cushion shoe, which is like, this is the optimal shoe. So it's like, which one is bad for you? Both are bad for you. One's maximal comfort, cushion, efficiency, and one's maximum pain, but you got to suck it up to look good, right? I saw a funny article literally yesterday. It said best sneakers to lounge around in to chill when you're recovering from running, and it was like the cushiest, warmest sneakers, and I was like, why is Google even targeting me with these articles? Like, dude, get your stuff right. Target me with zero shoes, man. Just target me with Shama sandals. Like, this is not the right article. I did read it for fun, but that was that. So I love your roundup. You really went into it. And I really want to differentiate as not just a barefoot educator, but as an actual performance coach who was working with athletes. I have three girls who are in America, in Alabama, in the World Games. They're going to the Olympics, God willing, in 2028. So like, it really matters for me, not just their health and longevity, which would matter to everyone, but also their performance. So if I take a top tier athlete and I say to them, hey, I want you to switch to minimalist shoes, let me guide you to this. They'll be like, hold up, Sean. What if minimalist shoes slows me down in my running or my sprinting? So I have to factor that in mind. And people don't realize that, especially
Mhm, mhm.
in the more athletic world, like, hold up. If I adapt my gait to a 4 foot mid strike, which is ideal, is that going to slow me down in my performance? Right. So that's like a deeper intrinsic layer that the regular dudes and dudettes who are just going for a 10K don't have. So we have to realize the impact and effects of our decisions. So because of that, I like to differentiate between regular movers, people who are just, walking, going out and about, surfing, playing with their dog, to more top tier people who are pro runners, ultra marathoners, sprinters, athletes, because it's like a total different category of transition. Would you agree with that, like, separation between the two?
Yeah, I think that's very fair, Sean. And I think that, I'm by no means a running coach, but I occasionally dabble at it because that was actually what I loved to do before I hurt myself. And everything that I've read about doing a good barefoot transition for a runner involves getting rid of the cushion completely, going straight into a super minimal shoe and cutting your time significantly while you retrain your gait. And that is a fair thing to ask if you happen to want to run in minimal shoes for an injury prevention purpose. But for somebody who's focused on performance, that's probably not the choice they want to make at this moment in time. But what they can do for sure is make a transition to barefoot style shoes in their regular life,
Mm.
keep their performance where it is, still be working on strengthening their feet, and at a time when they want to make that shift. So I think that what's so great about all of this minimal shoe stuff is that it's very customizable. Everybody can find a place for themselves. And it's just about trusting yourself and exploring and being open and being smart. And if something hurts not doing it, or something's going to affect your performance, and the performance is your main goal, then don't do it. Like,
Mm.
you can really be responsible for your own outcomes as you start to make these choices.
If I can, I'm gonna give a few. First of all, agreed completely. I like how you like reinforced the separation. I'm gonna give a few like case studies, so to speak, that I worked with. So one, we had this marathoner who's the head coach of the strength and conditioning flag football team that I work for. She's a marathoner, runs distance every time. First week of my job, she's like, "Hey, Sean, I heard you're the barefoot guy. Could you like recommend a good brand?" I said, "Yes, but oh man, one second." Yes, but I'm warning you that because you run so much mileage and you have the Jerusalem Marathon coming up next month, even if I suggest that you get lems or zeros or whatever it is, you can't just dip. Like, you have to like follow, as you said, cut your kilometers in half. The way I do it is, let's say for a competitive runner, once a week, run barefoot on a softer surface as you reteach your body how to learn gait. Running barefoot is a very, very good learner because you can heel. Very good, sorry, very good teacher because you can heel strike. Once a week, run in your cushioned sneakers. Run in your cushioned sneakers and see how does it feel. How does it feel between barefoot, and really listen to your body. Run on a softer surface and slowly teach your body how to relearn how to run. But if she needs to hit her 40, 50 kilometers, then it can't be done in a month, especially because she has to relearn. So she didn't listen to my advice, and she was started into running. And 2 weeks later, she developed Achilles tendonitis. Surprise! Since then, she's back in her regular cushion sneakers because she almost like lost trust. Since we have very good working relationships, we spoke about it, and I explained to her what perhaps we can learn from next time. And now she's like, okay, I understand. Miscommunication, mistake. That's an example of a pro runner doing it incorrectly. Another example, another guy I worked with who was in the military, so he had to pass his 3K time. It has to be done in under like 12 minutes. And he was always running in Vibrams. Then when he noticed when he switched to sneakers, he was still doing it with a 4 foot strike. He was able to do it like a minute faster. I was like, so run in sneakers, man. It's one fitness combat test. If 90% of the time you're barefoot or in minimal shoes, all's good. So that's like the general picture of minimalist footwear for performance. It's not about the 100%, it's about the 80-90%. If you can be barefoot at home, if you can be barefoot in the gym, if you could spend time barefoot with your kids on the beach, that's okay. And if you have to wear shoes sometimes, and even if, may the barefoot gods forgive me, if you have to wear heels at a wedding once because it's like your sister and she insists you wear heels, I wouldn't do it. My wife wouldn't do it, but wear heels. Like just wear heels, take them off and say, okay, I damaged my feet a bit. Let me undo that. That's
Yeah.
kind of my 2 cents there. Diving into transitions. So like someone here's, no,
Wait.
sorry,
Before
sorry,
you
sorry.
dive in, I have
Sorry.
two things to say about that because
Go
I
ahead.
think you brought up such a good point with the running people getting injured because they didn't transition well. And I think that is a huge barrier for people when they hear about transitioning to minimal shoes, is because when minimal shoes were first kind of talked about in like the 2000s, whenever it was, a lot of people did exactly that. They were like, awesome, I've like now got minimal shoes, I'm going to be healthy. And they just went back to running normally. And I think that really is an elephant in the room that you need to just be like, wait, that's because a lot of people did it the exact wrong way, heavily loaded shoes that feet that weren't ready to be loaded. So I'm glad you brought that up, because you need to be cognizant of the fact that a change of shoes is a big change for your body, whether you're a runner or not a runner, and be smart about it. So I think that was really a great point. So that was one of them. And I think your other point, which is that you're not going to hurt yourself if you have to go to a wedding in a high heeled shoe, is awesome too, because your body's really strong and resilient. Like I wouldn't wear a high heeled shoe because I hate it now. Like I just straight up don't like doing it, but that's just me. And for some years I did go back to my other shoes. You're in control. You can wear whatever shoes you like, and it's not going to hurt you one day, even a week, but it does over time matter. So it's one of those things where you get a lot of flexibility and you can trust your body to heal, and you're probably not going to want to wear those shoes very much anymore. So I just had to say that. So
No,
yeah, thanks for
I'm
bringing that
so
up.
happy we're bouncing off each other. People have heard the first half hour of our podcast. We managed to convince them that we're onto something here with this barefoot thing. Someone wants to transition. They have no idea what to do. They have no idea where to look, where to go. Petra, the mic's on you. Mic
Yeah,
buddies.
buddies. Okay. So I think that there are a lot of ways to think about your transition. And what's nice is that there's lots of resources out there for you. So I just wrote a giant blog post with everything that I have to say about transitioning. So I'm really excited about that because I've gotten a lot of questions about it. And in my mind, I think there's 3 ways you can transition. So number one is you can think, okay, I've been in conventional footwear for a long time. I don't want to do anything too drastic. I'm going to buy a really cushioned shoe that also has some room for my feet to move. And that's called a transitional shoe. And I'm just going to transfer into a transitional shoe and see how my body reacts to that. So that's kind of probably the most conservative way to transition, because it's a step down of shoe. It's not a complete change to barefoot. And I think that makes it a really great choice for somebody who has a lot of foot pain already, and who just wants to start exploring really carefully and really safely. So there's a whole bunch of transitional shoe brands. Ultras are my personal favorite. And I also really like the Bedrock sandals, but there's a ton of them, and you can find them if you start looking around in the barefoot shoe world for the transitional shoe. So that's option A. Option B is kind of a timed transition where you're like talking about what you were talking about earlier. You're going to take, say, an hour a day for week number 1 to be totally in a barefoot shoe. You're going to go for a very barefoot shoe like a Vivo Barefoot or a an unshoe, and you're going to be super barefoot for an hour a day. And if that feels good to you, the next week you're going to go for 2 hours a day. And the third week you're going to go 3 hours a day, and you just step up your time gradually. And of course, you're going to be smart about it. So if anywhere in that transition, things don't feel good to you, you're going to back off and spend more time in your conventional shoe. And you're going to probably support your body with some foot exercises along the way, because that's just always smart. And that's smart for the other type of transition as well. So that, I don't know if you know who she is, but Irene Davis is one of the top researchers around running in barefoot shoes. So I was lucky enough to listen to her talk to some people at the Healthy Foot Alliance the other day. And she said that's how she transitions people. So she takes her people in her clinic, and she thinks most people can transition in 8 weeks with that step time transition. And most people are going to have a successful transition just by increasing time and being smart about it. So that's a great option. And then the middle ground, which is actually my personal preference, is where you do a bit of both. You get yourself some transitional shoes and you get yourself some minimal shoes, and you transition into your transitional shoes, which doesn't necessarily take very long. Like you might be totally, if you're transferring from a sneaker with a closed toe, but not a ton of heel raise and not a ton of damage to your feet, you're going to be able to transfer into an ultra without very much adaptation time at all. And then you step that down into your barefoot shoe. And I love that, because that way, when you get out of your barefoot shoe for your rest, you don't put on your old shoe that's squishing your toes and giving you a raised heel. You put on a shoe that's really foot friendly. It doesn't give you as many strengthening benefits as the very minimal shoe, but you've got something that's not going to literally squish your toes. So I think that's perfect. And then what that gives you is a vision of variability, because I think one thing that's really come through in my own transition, and that's come through in the advice that I've gotten from all of the foot experts I've talked to, is that a barefoot shoe transition is not a one-time journey. You don't do it once and done and you're barefoot for the rest of your life. What you're going to find is that based on where you're at in your life, you're going to transfer back and forth between shoe A and shoe B and shoe C. And some days you're going to go for a giant hike. And so you're going to actually want shoe number D, because that's going to give you a little bit more protection. So it's not a one-way journey, and giving yourself more options right out of the starting gate starts you off understanding that it's about listening to your body, not about being like, hey, I'm a barefoot shoe wearer now and I never do anything else. So that's my personal favorite way. But in all cases, I would start by planning at least 8 weeks and be aware of the fact that for you, it might be 3 years, and that's totally okay. There's zero benefit to faster transitions that just hurt yourself.
So you said there was 3 options. You mentioned the transitioning to a like ultra or lems or a thicker sole. Then you mentioned getting both a really minimalist shoe and a more barefoot transition shoe. What would be the third option?
The third is where you just get a very minimal shoe, like
Mm,
a Vivo barefoot, and you time your transition. So
mm,
it's basically barefoot for an hour a day, week 1,
ah,
barefoot for an hour a day, week 2.
got it.
So yeah, yeah.
I like it. I like a lot how there's many places for people to transition. I also feel that even in the more advanced barefooters, such as I consider myself one, or I like to think I'm one, I consider you one, people have been spending years, not just spending time barefoot, but actually years strengthening their feet, strengthening their toes, strengthening their knees, ankles, and hips. When you can hike 30 kilometers barefoot, or when you can run a marathon barefoot without pain, it's telling you something about your body's basic ability. You earned, like barefoot Ted, right? So like you get the title barefoot if you run like a marathon barefoot. But if you can do these feats of achievement, you're telling yourself something. My feet are strong and resilient. So even me, like I've been dealing with some Achilles pain lately. In addition to strengthening with isometrics and mobilizing, I'll wear my Lems shoes, the Primal Zen, which has like an 11 millimeter sole, more often, because the thing that's aggravating my Achilles is by my, not when I run, but when I walk or hike, the heel strike, which is commonly found in walking, is bothering my Achilles. So even a more advanced barefooter such as myself has to regress a little bit back to progress. Now, it doesn't mean I'm going to put on regular sneakers. Petra said it perfectly. I have the wide toe box. I have the zero drop. I have all the characteristics of a barefoot shoe. I'm just giving myself a little bit more love and a little more cushion, so to speak, although compared to other shoes, it's not really cushion. So I love it. I love the way you like split it into 3 categories.
It's my legal brain.
Legal brain. I
But
like it.
I think that that's really important to remember. And I often get emails from people who are like, I've been wearing barefoot shoes for 3 years, but I have plantar fasciitis. Now,
Mm.
what's up with that? I just got it. And I think you have to remember that that you don't always get pain signals right away from a non-functional movement pattern. And so when you, in that example, if you get plantar fasciitis after you've been barefoot for 3 years, there is something missing in your movement pattern that is causing you to still be overloading your feet. And that might not be a question of your foot strength, which is probably pretty strong if you've been barefoot for 3 years. It might be a question of the way that you stand, or it might be a question of the length of your hip flexors in your walking, or it might be because you haven't done the work to give yourself hip mobility. There's a ton of other things that go into it. And so that's why, when I talk about doing a barefoot transition in terms of planning your shoe transition, that's going to give you a lot of benefits. Just so Irene Davis, who I'll just mention again, there are some really excellent studies that say that simply switching to barefoot shoes for 8 weeks will give you the same strength changes in your feet that doing a foot exercise program will give you. Now, I don't know what that foot exercise program was exactly, but you can compare those 2 things fairly accurately. Strengthening your feet with exercise, strengthening your feet with barefoot shoes gets you stronger feet. What it doesn't necessarily do is change your patterns. And that could be the patterns of your supination and pronation as you walk, which are essential movements in your foot. It could be how you heel strike. So as you mentioned, a walking strike should be a heel strike unless you're on uneven surfaces or climbing up and down hill. And then it can change, but you could not have good control of your lateral hips as you walk. And so you could be pounding your foot every time you heel strike, and you might not know that unless you go deeper. So I want to stress that it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be overwhelming to transition to barefoot shoes, but most people would be well advised to start on a program of foot strengthening and of body and movement exploration to support their journey if they want to get the maximum out of their transition. And certainly if they discover that they have ongoing issues or develop new issues in their bodies, for me, that's a flag that says, hey, there's something that's not working with what you're doing. Let's dial it back and let's see what will help you move to that next level that will not be hurting you. So that's where I come in, because I teach exercise and movement. And, I certainly have been found it's really interesting with my feet. I've done a ton of work, as you know, and my patterns are not there yet. I do not like the way my feet are callousing right now. I'm not getting an effective transverse arch in walking. And when I stand on one foot or load my feet, my big toes aren't stabilizing correctly. And I don't really know why. So I have an appointment with one of my teachers in an hour after this, because I need some troubleshooting help. And that can happen to anyone at any point in their journey. And I think that's important to recognize, is we're all on a journey here, and it's not always straightforward, but it can be. So the flip side is my boyfriend just switched to barefoot shoes. Did he do foot exercises? Absolutely not. Has he been barefoot for the last 5 years? No problem. Like, he's fine. So will he be fine in 20 years? Like, I don't know. I hope so. But you don't necessarily, everybody is different, I guess is where I'm going with that. So, every journey and everybody are very different with that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, this really message gives hope to all the people listening out there. Petra's, a prime example of a barefoot goddess, someone who's living, preaching, practicing, and like, hey, she's saying, hey, my gait's not perfect. I'm also a pretty barefoot, I'm the barefoot athlete, and my Achilles is hurting me. So like, there's no like perfect, and even more so, a lot of times I have found that when people start dealing with pain later on in their barefoot journey, it's hip related, it's gait related, it's movement pattern related, because the sneaker was able to compensate. That cushion was able to compensate in a bad way, but for them it was a good way because it wasn't causing them pain. And then they slowly started removing the sneaker, and then the body's trying to like figure it out. And after 3 months to 3 years of walking, running, sprinting this way, the body's like, I can't take this anymore. And that's where the pain comes in. That's what's happened with my knee. It's all about my ability to internally and externally rotate in the hip. And I see it when I slow-mo walk, when I slow-mo run, when I slow-mo sprint, exactly how my right foot is landing between my left foot. And Katie Bowman, who's like a freaking genius. Like, she's like, every single person who ever writes or speaks about barefoot refers to Katie Bowman. She's like the OG of barefoot. And she speaks about how, like, if your big toe is a little, let's say you have like a baby bunion, it's very likely coming from your hip, because that's the way. I'm not talking about the footwear aspect of it. I'm talking about, let's say someone's like barefoot, because if your hip is turned in a certain way, then your big toe is going to land on the floor as well. And like, I see that so much in everyone. Really, really like how you worded it. And we kind of dove into like, okay, here's how to transition to barefoot shoes. Now, because you're a movement and barefoot transitioning and strengthening expert, I think is a good term. Can we speak about the practicality of what needs to be done in addition to switching to those Vivos or Lems or Ultras? Toes, feet, mobility, strength, power, elasticity. I know you're super into like the jumping landing. That's a huge underlooked aspect. I think that must be talked about. Like, I'm an athletic performance coach, so I'm always like jumping landing, but people don't speak about the elasticity of the Achilles and how important it is when running, landing, and stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a really good question, and it's complex because there is, again, we're not in one size fits all territory. So my foot course is a behemoth. It takes most people 20 weeks to get through because I get so much into all the different pieces. I have to rejig it so it's a little bit more accessible for people, but it's a great foot course because it does all the things.
We'll link it below, like in the podcast description.
Cool, for anyone who really wants to take this one on. Okay, so I think at a minimum, At a minimum, so I've got a free foot course as well, and that's where my minimum goes in. You need to have some mobility in your foot. Whether you're a flat-footed person or a high-arched person, you are probably lacking foot mobility. So doing mobilization work, and that can include manual mobilization. So you can use your fingers to spread your toes apart, which is a really great starting point for a lot of people. You can roll on balls, you can step on balls, which I actually honestly prefer to rolling on balls because it's more like walking on texture. Just getting some passive mobilization. And that's a good starting point for almost all feet because it's accessible. So even your grandmother can start doing foot massage on a ball while she's sitting in her chair. So, you know, it doesn't matter where your feet are. And that can be an ongoing process because, again, remember, when we live in a house with flat floors and when we walk mostly on pavement, even in our minimal shoes, we're not getting a lot of mobility work in our feet. So I expect to continue doing mobility work for your feet. And I'm talking about passive mobility. Then I think you need some basic intrinsic muscle control. So you need to be able to do toe lifts and you need to be able to control your foot during your toe lift. So it's only your toe lifting, and you need to be able to create some strength and control over that. So if you're lifting your big toe and it's veering inwards, then you don't have the strength to stabilize your big toe when you walk. So you need to get some skill with that too.
So I'm just gonna backtrack. So when you say mobility for the foot, are you specifically referring to the arches and the toes, or are you referring to the ankle as well? I know that's complex, because then you can say, oh, knees and hips too. But what do you refer to when you say mobility? Because people are gonna ask.
It's a great question. Yeah, right now I'm talking about intrinsic to the foot mobility, so the forefoot and the midfoot.
Okay.
For sure, we're going to talk about knees, hips, and ankles because you can't really ignore them, but we're not there yet. Right now, we're just talking like
so mobility, and then we got basic toe stability, or even maybe like neural connection. Like I just did the workshop this morning, and like these people never lifted their toes before, but then 2 minutes later they're able to. I didn't teach them how to lift their toes. I just connected the dots in their brain. Hey, you could lift your toes.
Yeah, and let's be clear, so that's an awesome result because for me, it took 3 months to be able to do individual toe lifts. So, so either you're a better teacher than
no, I think
my teachers were, but you know, it depends, right? Because if you don't have neural connection, you don't have strength, and you don't necessarily have capacity. So there's a range there, but that's awesome that you had them doing it, and for sure that connection's huge. Then we're going to think about supination and pronation. So again, I keep talking about those because they're just fundamental, and to understand those properly, they're best thought about as a twist in your foot. And the way humans walk is quite unique because we're bipedal. So when you land on your heel, your foot needs to be in what's called a rigid lever. As you roll forward on your foot, it needs to soften in order to absorb shock. So that's your pronation moment. And there your foot literally untwists, widens, and lengthens. And that capacity is missing in a lot of people. And then as you roll forward over your toes to push off, your foot has to once again become rigid. Otherwise, it's not going to efficiently push you forward. So that's your supination. And that's what's missing in a bunch of other people. So that's what I'm missing. My boyfriend can't pronate. I can't supinate. We're a perfect pair.
Perfect pair.
So a really simple exercise to start working on that is calf raises. If you do calf raises correctly, you get a pronation and a supination benefit. And you also start working on your ankle strength and mobility with calf raises. So I would think that calf raise variations should be 100% on everybody's basic lists. And then I think the final piece that's like a must do is to work on back line length and strength. So that's your calves, that's your hamstrings, that's control over a hip hinge. That's a huge part of your walking. And if you don't have that, then your weight is always going to be pushing forward over your feet, whether you're standing or walking, and that's going to mess up your mechanics. So that's the package I put together into my sort of entry level free your feet free program, because those are going to help almost everybody. And then after that, you can go on and you can just go down the rabbit hole forever. And there, yes, you need ankle mobility. Yes, you need knee mobility. Yes, you need hip mobility, and you need hip control. And so you need so many pieces for optimal function. But if you start there, you're going to be well on your way to a very functional foot, I think.
Question. So why do you specifically emphasize posterior chain? What about like anterior chain, like the tibia and the quadriceps and the patella? Is there a reason why you didn't like emphasize that as well? Just curious.
Yeah, they're getting a lot more love these days, which is
Right.
nice.
It's mostly thanks to Ben Patrick. He's the OG of the anterior chain.
Knees over toes,
Yeah.
absolutely. But I think then you're thinking a little bit more of your athletics. Like I don't want to totally ignore the front of the foot,
Hmm.
but I think what you're going to see in a lot of people is that you simply have been sitting for a very long time, and
Mm.
whatever's happening in the back of your body, you're not going to have access to extension. And if you don't have access to hip extension and walking, I'm not sure how much time you've spent studying kind of walking mechanics, but in
Mm.
my brain, I like to oversimplify it into
Mm.
two main drivers of moving forward. There's the
Mm.
moving forward by leaning forward into the world and then catching
Mm.
yourself. And there's the driver of standing up straight and then pushing behind you with your
Hip
working leg,
extension.
which is almost like pushing a canoe.
Hmm.
And all of us are inevitably doing some of both in every walking
Hmm.
step, but most people are squarely stuck in falling forward world with very little of moving backward world. So I tend to think backwards because that's so lost for most of us.
Mm.
I think that, yeah, absolutely, like let's work on the front of the legs as
Hmm.
well. But if you're very tight in the calf and the back of your legs,
Mm.
what's happening in the front is probably tightness as well from having to pull on the back of your legs.
Mm.
So I'm not sure that you want to add tightness right away. What you might want to do is lengthen out the anterior compartment right away and start getting length through the front and some suppleness, so that then maybe along the way you can think about strengthening that. And don't
Mm.
forget, you want your knees over your toes to be very strong so that you can jump, so that you can go downhill,
Hmm.
so that you have great eccentric control. That's not step one. That's
Mm.
step three, I
Hmm.
think.
I like it. No,
But
I like it. I think you really, I'll simplify it even further. Basically, the muscles have this correlationship called an agonist-antagonist relationship. So if my calves are working or overworked, my tibia, which is the muscle in the front, has to be the exact opposite. So for example, if I'm always in heels, or if I'm always in a cushioned shoe, that's not just going to shorten my calf, it's also going to lengthen my tibia. And it's kind of this love-hate relationship. So if one side is doing X, the other side is doing Y. So I wasn't like, oh, you forgot anterior chain. I was just curious about your philosophy. I like it. I
yeah.
think step one. Also, just thinking about the basic way you walk. I mean, you extend your hip. 90% of the time when we're walking, it's hip extension, correct? It's plantar flexion.
Only if you have hip extension. Only if you have hip
I
extension, which
was
actually
trying to
most people
bait. I was trying
don't.
to bait you into saying that.
Oh, you got me.
Right. Yeah.
You got me. So as you know, most people, like, there are many people who are literally stuck in true hip flexion, cannot get a 0-degree angle between the hip and the pelvis. And so asking those people to extend their hip, and that is because absolutely heeled shoes and chairs, asking those people to extend their hip is it's an impossibility. And what you're going to get when you say, hey, you need to change your walking by trying to get your heel behind you longer, is you're going to end up with more pelvic rotation or more leg rotation or some sort of compensation. So in my mind, it makes much more sense to work on your capacity before you even think about working on your technique. If you don't have
Mm,
lateral hip strength, then you're not going to be able to hold yourself balanced on one leg
mm,
as you walk. So don't worry about your walking until you've worked about balancing on your one leg.
mm,
And just a quick uh, addendum to that
mhm,
anterior chain conversation. Yes, for sure, short calves, longer tibia, but that doesn't necessarily mean the tibia is functional or not overworked, because remember,
mm,
you're still having to pull against that tight calf
mm,
every time you take a step.
mhm,
So, you know, it's so it just doesn't boil down into necessarily easy explanations. One great exercise that maybe is a great starting point that I didn't actually put in my foot thing because I had to cut it out somewhere, but simply walking backwards is a great underused, super simple exercise, because there you're getting knee over toes control, anterior compartment eccentric control, lots of work on foot strengthening, and especially on supination arch strengthening. And it's so easy. If you have a safe street, you can do like 10 minutes a day of that. That's an
mhm,
awesome, easy one to do too.
mhm.
Ideally
And
barefoot.
yeah, of course, if it feels very effortless, you could obviously change it up. You could walk on an uphill, which even actually forces you to get mechanics better. I found that because I work with athletes a lot. I know I'm speaking a little bit more in the advanced realm. I think we're both on a little bit of different spectrum as who are like day-to-day people we see. But let's say I want to work on their speed and acceleration ability. So I'll use a sled that forces them to lean forward and really get into triple extension. If they don't have a sled, I'll just use a hill, because the hill forces you to lean forward and get into extension. So the incline of a backwards walk is the same thing. It forces you to get that larger range of motion. We said step one, and I'm going to reflect back. So we said
Mhm.
basic foot and toe mobility. We're not really talking about the ankle, although it's important as well. Then we said basic stability of the toes, basic or neural capacity, ability to, fire up the toes, so to speak. Step 3 we moved on to was, remind me.
I think that was pronation and supination. Get
Pronation,
that ability to get
supination.
those mechanics, calf
Okay.
raises.
So
Yeah.
calf raise, like basic calf raise, the basic motion we're going to do when we walk. And then step 4 was?
Back line, length, and strength. So
Got it. So
getting
posterior
some
chain. Okay.
suppleness.
So
Yeah.
that's level 1. That's like level 1 entry point. I transitioned to barefoot shoes. I mastered these. Check out Petra's course. It will help you master these. Now we're at step 2. What's the next layer? I've been doing this for 6 months. I've been doing this for a year. I've been doing this too. Now I don't just want strong, resilient feet, but I want strong, athletic, unbeatable, unstoppable feet. What's my next step?
That is a great question. I think your next step is to start really self-evaluating to see where your weaknesses are, because everybody's going to come into this a little bit differently. So the obvious one would be me and my boyfriend. Like, he needs to work on his pronation because he doesn't have it. I need to work on my supination because I don't have it. But if we want to be very general, I would say next step is walking mechanics. So do you have hip extension? Do you have hip rotation? Do you have lateral hip strength? Do you understand what walking could look like? I don't like to use the word should, but do you have a sense of the patterns available in your walking? Are your feet very turned out when you walk? What are your personal rotational biases? I have very internally rotated hips. So for me, I'm all about, like, I need more external rotation capacity for sure. And that's probably affecting my supination. Do you twist your pelvis at 10 when you walk? I think that's probably where I'd go next. I'm not sure. So like I said, the reason my foot course is super long is because it's got different divisions into each of those. So I've got a whole bunch of stuff on foot mobility, and then I get into like a whole bunch of stuff on back line. And then when you get into hip mobility, probably as you know as well, you can't really work on hip extension until you've worked on hip rotation, because hip rotation is your primary prerequisite to extension. But you've got to work on hip extension. So that means psoas. And then you've got also, oh man, step 2 is giant. What's your step 2?
So it's funny you say that, but I would think first my initial response would be, now that you've built the foundation, start strength training in a full range of motion. But, and here's the big but, even the good old exercises, like you're a lover of squats, I'm a lover of squats, but squats are biased, right? So if someone's either struggling in extreme external rotation or extreme internal rotation, he or she should still be squatting, but they have to understand the consequences of always, especially the way the squat is cued in the gym. So like, press your big toe, pinky toe, heel on the floor, push your knees slightly out, which is winding up your hip into external rotation. You're constantly biasing your body into a certain position, and that may not even be your hip struggle. So guys came along like Ben Patrick, like I don't know if you've ever heard of the Goda method, greatest of all time athletes. He's all about the tibial rotation. So he's constantly, I already got out of the sauna, I'm standing now. I just couldn't sit for that long. But he'll do all these movements where you're putting your knee and hip into complete internal rotation to bias all the people who are stuck in external rotation. And it's all these strength movements which you're doing, which are fantastic. And you must be strength training in many planes, sagittal, frontal, transverse, however you want. They could just be reinforcing your body's quote unquote faulty, or I'll use a more positive term, not good yet mechanics. And the whole concept of, like, I remember learning in school, like they speak about like X knees and O knees. It could be that people's anatomical structure, they're born in a certain way, but you're not stuck in a certain position. That's such a Western approach. Like, oh, here's a shoe, here's an orthopedic insole. Your knees and hips are capable of moving. It may be more difficult for you to transition to something better. So step 2 for me is strength training, based exactly as you said, like learning how to walk. The only way to learn how to walk is either speak to a specialist or start filming yourself and seeing how you walk. So I think strength training is the same way, and start assessing yourself constantly. I think you said the same thing. Assessment, like assess what are my mobility restrictions. I like to call mobility training a lot of times can be very vanilla. I like dividing vanilla chocolate, even though I'm more of a cinnamon guy. Chocolate is like specific mobility for my goal. So if I'm struggling with external rotation, let me do a mobilization that will help me improve my external rotation. As opposed to, hey, I just saw Sean or Petra post like a nice hip mobility video. Let me just do it for fun, which is great. You're moving, you're off the couch, hell yeah. But is it specific to your needs? So if you assess your needs and know what's best for you and not do a cookie cutter mobilization or cookie cutter strength program, then that will be good. I think we said the
Yeah.
same thing, maybe in different.
I think we did say the same thing, because I think that, the basics are, there are basics that apply to almost everybody. And I think the more I work on this, I really am interested in trying to make movement work accessible, and people like to have goals to hit. And there are some goals that I think there are some shoulds. You should be able to stand on one leg for 15 seconds at a time without falling. There's some shoulds. But everyone's at a different starting point. So that's why it's very hard to give you a prescription where it says you need to work on your balance, because maybe you're great at your balance, but your breathing is weird. So I think it does come down to assessment. And so for me, the other starting point into my work is with the FRC mobility work that I do. Is I teach CARs. CARs are controlled articular rotations, and they're a daily joint practice that I know you're aware of. And they're awesome because they're an ABC type practice. They are like learning to lift your toes. They are very simple in their concept, but they're very broad in their application. And one of the things that's awesome about the CARs is you get assessment. If you cannot rotate your tibia, instantly you need to work on learning to rotate your tibia. And that's going to carry forward to your gait, and that is going to help you support your foot journey. If you have zero hip internal rotation, suddenly you're like, oh, hey, I know I need to work on that, because once again, you need that to walking. So I love those things that are easy assessments. And you don't always get that with something like a squatting pattern where you're like, oh, I can do a squat or I can't do a squat, but you don't necessarily see why, because it's a hugely complex movement with many, many components. So I think that, stage 2 is assessment, and you don't always get a sense of assessment until you've started exploring. So maybe stage 2 is go deeper and try some stuff and see what's working, what isn't, and start building. I think of it as a body journal where you're like, oh, this pattern is this for me. I think what's going on with my feet actually has a ton to do with my core and lower back. So you don't get that kind of understanding until you've done a crap ton of work. And the nice thing about the work is that for most people, it's enjoyable and it's very healthy because you're working on all these different cells. So whether you're strength training or walking on a balance beam or doing the kind of focused mobility work that I personally like to do, you're going to learn a ton along the way. And I think that's where it opens up and actually becomes really interesting, because you're going to learn a lot about yourself as you do good to yourself along the way.
I totally resonate with that. I think step 2 is a place where most of us are. Even the world's strongest men and women, or like superstar athletes, are always looking to improve not just their speed, but their everything. There's always a little bit improvement that can be squeezed out of the hips, the ankle, your speed, your strength, your agility, your vertical power. And the athletic growth, people are always trying to get better. I would say if I would have asked what would be a step 3, it would be set a tangible, badass goal. Whether it's chasing the 100-foot wave after you've mastered your body, which we're all striving, master your performance would be the better term. Chase the 100-foot wave when you surf. Go for that marathon. Go squat 100 kilo. Go hike 50 kilometers barefoot. Like, find your tangible end game where you can really feel accomplished and be proud of how hard you work to get to that third step.
It's always a really interesting conversation. And in some ways, that's a very appealing one for me. I think that if I had been 20 years younger, I would have been like, yeah, that's awesome. I totally want to achieve that. But, because my body started kind of really starting to hurt when I was in my early 30s, I've learned to very much appreciate just being able to do life. And so I'm much more measured with my goals these days. For me, the goal is to be able to do a hike on the weekend, barefoot or not barefoot, but not hurt afterwards. And I think that, again, it's fascinating because there's such a big spectrum, right? Your audience is much more athletic and like, hey, let's go get a 100-foot wave. I'm like, I would hate to do a 100-foot wave. I have just barely gotten to the level of my surfing where I'm like, look, it's a nice 4-foot wave. I can do a turn on it. I feel great today. But for me, that's an achievement. So it is, I do think that you're right. There's these external goals, but for me, it's very much about sustainability and supporting smaller goals so that I can keep having new goals. But either way, there's a pushing yourself. And again, for me, as I'm getting older as well, I just turned 48. So now I'm like, okay, well, muscle loss becomes a big thing at this age. Like, absolutely, muscle mass is huge. If you look at hunter-gatherer populations, they don't lose a ton of muscle as they get older. They actually do more activity in their grandparent stages than the parents do, because the parents look after kids. The grandparents are the ones hunter-gathering. So how can we take modern bodies and have those outcomes? And that, for me, is what really fires me up. So it is zone 2 cardio, and it is let's lift things so that we get muscle mass retention. Let's build balance. Let's build sustainability. Let's find those weird patterns and work on decreasing the weird patterns. You lose joint what's the right word?
Suppleness.
Our ligaments, well, suppleness, I guess. You lose collagen at menopause. So that's a, looming issue for me and many women as well. So again, that joint mobility is absolutely huge. And all of that will support your journey. And so that's why the feet, they're this entry point for all this stuff. But I also love the athletic stuff. I love learning to jump, and it's so satisfying. Are my jumps awesome and impressive? No, they're never going to be awesome and impressive. Am I okay with that? Absolutely. Because I can jump, which is crazy.
I think
So
your
it's
jumps are awesome and
super cool.
impressive.
Yay.
I mean, you had a perfect landing. I think like last week's Instagram post, it was inspiring. Like like I'm saying, maybe my mom's like in her 50s or 60s. Like, I don't think she could jump like that. You know what I mean? Wanted to touch upon a few last points, and we can wrap up here. Some questions from the community. So before I do that, first of all, I think the concept of FRC, functional range conditioning, and MoveNat, and all the things we're exploring, they're all trying to replace what we had naturally back in the day. So FRC is about always constantly exploring your range of motion. And if you do the research, and I've done it, the Spartans, they would limber before battle, they would stretch, they would mobilize their body because they realized the importance of being able to move in a full range of motion. They didn't inherently strength train by going to the gym and bench pressing, but what they did do is lift heavy rocks, lift heavy animals. When they were fighting and sparring and swinging their swords around, they were getting the MoveNat style of movement. So these two worlds blend. MoveNat's all about exploring and moving things and moving in the wilderness. And I think I really like it, even though I'm not like I have his book. It's on my shelf. It's a great book. What's his name? Edwin D. Licor. He does emphasize strength training, which many people get lost in the movement world of like, let me just like flow. No. Lift heavy stuff too, please. It's so important. Even if it's twice a week lifting heavy rocks, spinal waves aren't going to make you stronger. They may do many, many other benefits, but like lifting heavy stuff is important. So that's good. FRC is, let's say, the other spectrum. Let me constantly assess and reassess my ability to move. That's what I just want to like throw out there because it's so important, and it gets so lost of like, I'm just going to do yoga forever. Great, yoga is a very healthy practice, but you still have to add some form of resistance training in your lifestyle. If you want to do it in a gym, if you want to do it in your garden, if you want to lift your kid overhead, that's also great.
I agree. And it's really interesting. And you see it, because we're living with my mother right now. She's older and she's got older friends, and they lose the ability to live because they can't lift the heavy things. So it's not just about looking awesome or whatever. It delivers very tangible benefits. There's a lot of increasing evidence about just how important muscle is for stuff other than being strong too. It has it has hormonal implications in your life. Like, it's a part of your immune system. Like, your muscle system is really important, and it's wide ranging. And so I think that's also the lifestyle piece. That's the Katie Bowman piece too, right? You can lift your body weight up and down from the ground 20 times a day if you just don't sit in chairs very often. Right. So you get strength training in multiple ways if you layer it in, which is super cool.
Got it. So Petra, we have some questions from our community, and if you're allowed to answer this without a bias, what is your favorite barefoot shoe?
Oh my God, that's the hardest question literally ever. To be honest, I would really rather not wear shoes at all, given the opportunity. That's one of the reasons that we travel full time, is so I can be barefoot full time. If it's the shoe that I'm just like, I'm so happy to wear this shoe, it's my Soft Stars. Every time I put on my Phoenix boots, I'm like, these are the best.
Yum.
But shoes depend on context. So I would not wear my Phoenix boots hiking or to the beach. And so for those, it depends. I'm sorry for the crappy answer.
Soft Star. Okay, Soft Star Phoenix. Shout out to Soft Star. Question number 2. We just spent an hour talking about transitioning to barefoot, but, and this is a hard one, if you can sum up your advice in like a one-liner elevator pitch, what's the first thing? Oh no, let's just do another podcast. What's the first thing you will say or recommend to this person?
To transition?
Yes.
Oh, we just spent an hour. This is so
I know,
unfair.
but these are the questions. So that's what I'm just passing the message on.
It's really hard. Normally I like questions. You guys are tough. The one line piece of advice is take it slow, listen to your body, and be prepared to explore.
I would probably answer, take your shoes off at home, and if it doesn't cause you pain. That would be like the biggest takeaway.
That's good.
I think that people look at me like I'm the barefoot guy in Israel. It's like, hey, it's the barefoot guy. He's shopping in the supermarket without shoes. But I'm an extremist, not in a bad way. You're also an extremist. We took it to the like extreme. We spend most of our life barefoot. Regular go-to people don't have to do that. They can just take their shoes off at home and slowly strengthen their feet from there. Question number 3. I have to remember it. 1 second. Oh, what? So I know you're a big surfer, but what's your favorite sport or favorite like
Oh,
pastime?
I'm much more of a mountain person. And I'm only surfing because my boyfriend wants to surf. Starting to like it, but no, I would hike. I would just hike all the time if I had the option.
That's hilarious. So Sarah and I are the opposite. Sarah's the surfer. I'm the hiker. We
That's
switch roles.
awesome.
So she'll go surfing. I'll go with Charlie, and we'll just like hike along the beach and watch her surf. Try to get some good pictures of her. So opposite ends there. But I dabbled in surfing a bit because it's her passion. But I realized that I love the ocean, but surfing just doesn't call to me as much as it does to her. Cool.
Yeah.
Last question, and I have to remember this one. Oh, what would you say if you can give us a glimpse into your lifestyle? And when I say lifestyle, combining like, your strength regimen, your mobility regimen. I know you do your cars every day. What does it look like? Like, what is your protocol to take care? Because the reason why this was asked is because people who follow you, you're like I'm trying to think how to say this without being offensive. I'm in my 20s, right? I'm young. So of course, I mean, I don't think it's of course, but I'm young and out and about playing sports because I'm in my 20s. There's not so many 40 plus year olds out there living that healthy, holistic, longevity style lifestyle that you're pursuing. So you're like a huge role model for all the 40-year-olds out there who are like, I wouldn't say jealous, but who are like, damn, this woman's badass, right? This woman's like, she's got her stuff together. So like, I don't know how to word this question well, but what's your secret? Like, what is your protocol? What's your lifestyle? Does that make sense? What's the secret?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. It's quite variable because of traveling, but the pieces that I try to get in regularly are every morning I either walk or when we're surfing, we'll surf first thing in the morning. I think early morning light exposure is really, really important.
Is
So
that
every morning getting
is
out.
that in a fasted state or not inherently? Like, are you like,
Fasted,
caffeine
yeah,
fasted?
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
got it.
yeah. I don't eat until noon normally.
Mm,
And I do cars before or after that activity for sure. So
mhm,
cars are the basic maintenance practice for mobility. What we try to do is do one kind of class or workout a day. So that could be
mm.
surfing, that could be a MoveNet workout, that could be a kin stretch class. So something that I'm not having to teach or drive by myself, that someone else is teaching me. And because I'm a teacher, I will often also do a class from another teacher. So right now I've just enrolled in Lauren O'Han's Restore Your Core certification program. And so I'm doing a lot of Restore Your Core classes right now. So I take in a lot of movement stuff. And then I also take a lot of movement breaks in my day. So I ground live. So I sit on the floor and then I try every 15 minutes to go and do something. So that's where I do my push-ups. It's where I do my pull-ups. It's where I do a lot of crawling. I try to do some lifting heavy stuff as part of that too. So right now, every time I go out to do my pull-ups, I'm carrying a 40-pound weight
Mm.
to the garage and back. So that kind of more loaded stuff I do as movement breaks normally. And then ideally, I will also do personal mobility work in the afternoon before dinner. So I'll spend between 20 minutes and half an hour. Right now, I'm working more spinal mobility and foot stuff than anything else, but that just depends on what my goals are. And then pre-bed, I try to do some breathing and some cool down work. So sometimes I'll roll before bed. Kelly Surratt was raving about rolling before
Mm.
bed. So I've just started, I'm like, all right, 10 minutes of rolling before bed. So I move a lot. I move a
Mm.
lot and it's very variable because my lifestyle is very variable. So I would probably have more impressive results if I were more consistent, but I'm also not really a big fan of that. So it depends where we are and when we are. So yesterday we hiked,
Yeah.
and we did
Yeah.
cars. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I mean, there was some gemstones just in your daily routine. It was almost like Ben Greenfield style. First of all, you gave this awesome hack that coaches and trainers don't use enough. Buy other coaches and trainers stuff. Like every time I see a
Right.
coach I respect, like when you launched your program, I'm like, of course I'm enrolling in this to like let me see what Petra's like can offer and add to my wisdom.
Mhm.
Every time a coach or a colleague that I know offers something, doesn't matter to me if it's free or cost, like I think that knowledge is the best investment. Buy into
Mhm.
them. Even if you learn one thing new, you're now going to be able to apply that to your clients, your athletes, your community. Number two, even though some people may look at your lifestyle like, whoa, that's too much, it's so sustainable. You never need a gym. You never need like much equipment, maybe just like a heavy kettlebell. If you don't have kettlebell, pop some water bottles in your
Hanging
bag,
bars.
hanging off a tree. Like it's so sustainable. And you also, I mean, I kind of said it already, but you're hacking your life. You're hacking your daily structure to incorporate movement with it instead of after sitting for 8 hours having to like, oh, I have to drive to the gym now. You get to the end of the day and you already checked off all sorts of movements. What you said about consistency, I think, okay, I'm a strength coach, right? So I have to be that guy who's like, you must be applying progressive overload every workout. But that doesn't apply to the everyday dude who just wants to conquer the game of life. If your end goal is to be able to lift your grandkids over your head, then you will be able to do that by lifting that 40 kilo and walking to the pull-up bar and hanging out and carsing one day and kin stretching one day, although that's kind of similar to the same thing, and core. If you're constantly moving, you're going to have a healthy lifestyle. You won't be the fastest person in the world. You won't be the superstar athlete, but that's not your goal. So it's all about goals and progression. Can you tell us everywhere where we can find you, what programs you offer, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn? I don't even know anymore.
I'm not on all of them. I would die. My Instagram is probably the best place to find me. So that's Petra Fisher Movement on Instagram. And my website is also Petra Fisher Movement. And that's where you can pick up the awesome free stuff that is out there right now. So I am really happy with my new Free Your Feet course. We talked about it a lot today. And did you like the scenery? I made the scenery. Yeah. Isn't it good?
It was so informative. Like I'll give you an example. Like I've done the Foot Collective courses. Like, as I said before, any colleague, any person I buy into their stuff, there's one thing like, okay, guys, roll your foot out. You were like, we're really intrinsically going into the details of the what, the whys, and the hows, and it really like it taught me a lot as well. It was cool. It was very informative. Thank you.
Cool. Well, I'm glad to hear that. I think, and I totally agree, the more people you can learn from, the better off you are, because everyone will make you think differently. And so I just want to make a shout out to you in that sense. So I just wrote that big article on how to transition. So if you want the real details on how to transition, like, it's all there for you. But I'm super proud that you and a bunch of other really amazing foot people were contributing to this amazing giveaway that comes with the article that's got top expert advice on what to think about for your transition. And I have to tell you, that was such a great project for me to do, because I learned a ton too. Like, my perspective on transitioning has changed from writing that, and it's so valuable, and you're going to get some just great connections from that too, because it's got a list of some really smart people. So yeah, like, broaden your range, meet the people. This is a community and it's super exciting, and the more we learn and share together, the more we all learn. So that's awesome. So yeah, my website and my IG are probably the best.
Website, IG, okay. And the free foot your course is like a funnel to your longer 8-week workshop, the really long. That's
okay. You know what? It's totally confusing. No, it's not. I'm going to be revising Build Better Feet next year, because it is too big and people get totally intimidated by it. So right now, the way it works is I've got Free Your Feet, which is my foot course. Like, everyone should do it. The next thing you should probably buy is Joints for Life, which is cars, and cars are great because everyone can do them. You can do them in 10 minutes. It's a vitamin pill for your movement. And then the funnel right now is that I am going to be opening my membership program again in the fall. My membership is where I teach everything, but I teach it in tiny classes. So it's 10-minute classes that you can do like 1, 2, 3, 4 times a week, learn movement, and you're going to learn it very step by step and learn everything from your feet to your joints, to your hips, to your whatever. So Take 10 is my kind of flagship, but that's going to be October. That's not coming up for a while.
I highly suggest any person who has any goal to check out Petra's work. I came across her work a few years ago. I fell in love. I also saw you were on Clayton's podcast, which was super cool. So I'm like, the second I saw that, I'm going to have Petra on my podcast as well. It's fun. Speaking about always learning stuff. So when I was first launching my barefoot transition course, my original vision was 12 months long. And the reason why I had that, right, because I'm like, you can't restore your feet in 12 months. You just spend 20 years messing them up. But then I realized that as much as I have this great vision of making this year course, it's possible that people will buy it, but my interest is not the money. My interest is that I help them. So if I give them a 12-month course, the chance of them actually succeeding, they'll probably fall off the bandwagon. So I turned into a 30-day course, and then I realized that's too short. So I turned it into a 6-week, which I feel is like, if you can do these 6 weeks, it's very similar to you, build a foundation, and then like progress from there, check out my next program, or check out your next program, or check out whatever. I'm trying to think of another Katie's new program, then like you can figure it out. So any other tips, wisdom, advice, insight, stuff you want to add to our audience before we call it a day?
Well, I think I'll just repeat what I've already said. Like, I don't think you can lose with this. And the way you make sure you win is to listen to yourself and don't overdo it. Be careful and considerate of your body, but also explore and have fun, because it's awesome. And everyone I know who's done it right loves it. So it's why we're all crazy cult people now.
We are. Really, barefoot really is a cult. Anyways, thank you so much for coming on the show. That's it. I'm so
It's a
happy to
real
have
pleasure,
so happy to
Sean.
have you. Happy to meet you. Continue to inspire. Continue to surf with your boyfriend and do what you guys do awesomely. I loved your new squat video, and yeah, that's all for today.